Okay, so here we are at the University of Mount Olive in North Carolina, the United States. We're broadcasting this out to cyberspace for YouTube, whoever may be looking. This is our MBA class, or some of the members of our MBA class, particularly a team that has been studying Toyota, the automotive company. And this team is going to provide us with a strategic assessment of Toyota. And with that, I'm going to introduce Katie Kelly. Katie will introduce her teammates, and then we will start looking at the PowerPoint slides. Katie?
All right. Hey everyone. My other teammates joining me today is Heather Pickle and Christian Turner, and we're excited to get started about Toyota.
Okay, here we go. At least I think here we go. There it is. All right. Who's first?
I can't. Okay, there we go. I was like, I can't see it. Okay.
Who's first?
Go down to the second slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had done that.
Okay, first we have the background of Toyota, so just a brief overview. The CEO is Akito Toyoda, and Toyota was founded in 1937 in Japan. And Akito, he has been the CEO since June 23rd of 2009.
Okay.
And so the mission statement and vision statement, just a conclusion of both of them. Toyota really harps on to have that high like customer service. They want the most high quality products. They want to satisfy customers and meet customer needs. You can go ahead. Okay, so just a little history, some turning points in history of Toyota. So the company, like I said, started in 1937. They were established. Their first overseas plant was in Brazil in 1962, which kind of surprised me that was in Brazil. I would have never guessed it would have been. Toyota has moved its headquarters a couple times. So to California now, which their headquarters is back in Japan. Toyota, they became the first #1 vehicle importer in the United States in 1975, and you can continue. And Toyota, they have produced 100 million vehicles in Japan in 1999. So I think that was just something that stood out to me, that they have produced a lot of vehicles overseas. And just to see like another thing, how their headquarters has moved from Japan to California to in 2014 to Texas. I thought that was just unique. Okay.
For sure. A quick comment about 1984. You'll probably be talking about it later, but that's NUMMI, the joint venture between Toyota and General Motors in Fremont, California, right outside of San Francisco in Northern California. And that joint venture really was important for both companies. Back there in the 1980s, we were beginning to experience shortages of gasoline. And the gasoline petroleum cartels were forming and so forth. And American car companies just did not know how to make small cars, let alone gas efficient cars. So General Motors wanted to learn from Toyota how Toyota did that. On the other hand, Toyota wanted to learn how to do business in the United States because, as Katie pointed out, prior to that, it had just imported cars. But it knew that as time passed, it had to have plants in the United States and had to produce the cars here. So in this joint venture, each one learned from the other. Most observers think that Toyota was the one that learned the most, and we can conclude that because of Toyota's large market share in the United States. So they sure learned something during that time. In any event, that plant at Fremont was closed, golly, 3 or 4 years ago. And it's kind of interesting. The company that bought the NUMMI plant. Does anybody know who bought that plant at Fremont, California? A little company called Tesla. Isn't that something? So this company that's revolutionizing the electric car company bought the plant that revolutionized the balance between domestic and international producers in the United States way back in 1984. Just sort of a comment on history repeating itself. All right, now I promise that I won't do that very often. This is your presentation, but NUMMI is pretty important in the history of the auto industry, and I thought you all should know that.
So this is Toyota's first car, was the Model A, and so you can definitely see it. You don't see many of them on the roads today. Okay, you can go ahead. And then this is just what I found, which is the longest long seller cars in the game, more than 50 years for Toyota, which I really thought was really surprising to me, especially the coaster down at the bottom right in the corner, which I'll talk about that a little bit later on, because I originally, when I started researching about the coaster, I kind of thought it was something, had just been introduced within the last couple years. And then I found out that it's actually, been something way longer than I had ever, knew about. And it kind of looks like something more modern. Like you wouldn't think that, something like that would have been 50 years ago. Okay, you can go ahead. So this is the Crown. In 1957, it was the first passenger car made in Japan to be exported to the United States. And, that's another thing that really surprised me, how much they exported, from Japan to the United States. Okay, you can go ahead. So I found this picture, which what really stood out to me, you can see the first two cars on the graph is, the Model A and the Crown that we just talked about. But not only could you see the difference between when it first started to now, how cars has changed, but down at the bottom, what stood out to me was the major world events that Toyota has been through. So World War II, you have different crises that happened along the way. And, even though, some of us, we weren't living during the time, World War II, but, when 9/11 happened, they, were through that, and now with the coronavirus. So this definitely shows, and later on we'll explain some of the challenges they have faced over, the period, over the years, just, with these major events that happened in history.
I think the blue shading over on the right side, the graphs are also very important. We can see the legend here if you want to take us through that, Katie.
Okay, so you can see it's really kind of hard to tell you know, the difference between the kind of like the lighter blue is domestic, and the like the darker blue is like overseas sales. And you can just, I mean, to me, what I got out of it is overseas sales, they do more business overseas than particularly in the United States. And that's what I got out of it.
I think when we look at the markets later on, it'll become pretty obvious that Toyota, has had a good domestic market for some years as the Japanese economy grew and so forth. But for Toyota to realize its potential, it just has to be an international marketer, whether it's through exporting as earlier in its years in the US or as a producer domestically. And we can see that the light blue shows that Toyota has built plants where the market is, and is a it still ships stuff overseas, but it is a domestic producer wherever in the world it might be, by virtue of the plants that it locates in other countries.
I definitely believe Toyota is definitely a big international business, and they know how to do business in other countries.
For sure.
So compared to like some of other businesses or companies that really are maybe just getting introduced into international business, Toyota is something they have been around a long time. It's not their first ballpark in an international business.
Well, and Japan certainly as a country can't consume cars in the same volume that a country like the United States or China can. So by necessity, Toyota is a very international company, and its strategy, the way it goes to market, the way it does business, is different from an American company, for instance, or some of the new Chinese companies. Toyota by necessity, even as it sprung up after the Second World War, to do business successfully, it just had to be a world player. And so Toyota is a very interesting example in international business, which of course is what this course is about. I better flip the slide, huh?
Okay, and this is just a short little video of just the past to the future of Toyota.
Do you want to run it now, or let the people look at it when they look at the PowerPoints on Moodle?
I mean, that's fine. There's some significant things, but we pointed out most of them. They can look at it later.
Okay. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
I just really liked how it had it like laid out.
Well, then we can look at it if you want to.
No, it's okay.
All right.
Next we have is products and services in the United States that Toyota produces. So you can see from cars to minivans, trucks, crossovers, SUVs, and hybrids. You can, pretty much, you can drive down the road and pretty much see any of, them cars down, on a daily basis. So this is the coaster, which, like I said, I really thought it was like something that was introduced, a couple years ago, maybe not, that has been in the market for over 50 years. And that link down at the bottom is actually a link to the Toyota website, but in Japan. And so I did the best I could. I got that picture off of it and just trying to do research, but the website is in Chinese, And so it was, I couldn't read it. I couldn't make out anything. I tried to convert it over, but that's just something, one of the products and services in China that they have, and just, it's not something that you would see here in the United States. Okay.
I'm bringing it up for you since I frustrated you in the
No,
first one.
no,
It's there we go. Let me bring it up here now. That's assuming that this thing will cooperate with me. And of course, whenever you want it to, it doesn't.
I just thought it was interesting, how their website is set up compared to the website for the United States.
Okay, so now we have it. I'll have to make it go back. Doggone it. Okay. Oh, it's this one. Okay. And so now what I need to do is get it to, I want it to go back to where it began.
Okay, so y'all can see, how their website is set up. Definitely. I mean, I cannot read personally, none of that. But I just thought it was neat how their layout of their website is somewhat.
I'm sorry. I couldn't get it for you. This is what you wanted to see, right?
Yeah, this is okay. But you can just tell, like, some compared to like the US Toyota's website and their website, you can see some similarities, you can see some differences. And the two cars, like it shows on here, is something you could possibly see in the US, and nothing that was out of the ordinary. But definitely the coaster is something that really surprised me, that they're selling, especially it being a bus. Like, um, you know, not many people, buy a bus, here in the United States just for, a family vehicle or something.
See if I can get us back to where we were. Can you see that all right now?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay.
And then you can continue down.
There we were with the bus.
Yes.
And,
All right. You get the next one. And then I'm going to turn it over to Christian to give the 5-year trend, sales, profit, and capital.
Thank you very much, Katie. Before I get started, I will mention that I regret that this is an online thing, because now I have a laser pointer and I have nothing to point it at. Okay, so as Katie said, these are the 5-year financial trends for Toyota. As you can see, it starts in 2015 and concludes with an estimate for 2020, as the full year hasn't developed yet. These figures here are represented in millions of US dollars. So for simplicity's sake, we're going to start from sales at the top and try and work our way down to the bottom. So you can see in 2015, we had sales of about $252 billion. There was a short little dip in 2016, but after that, it stabilized and managed to bounce back. And so now we're seeing an increase to about $284 billion after the 2020 year. Next, we have operating margin, which is it's a reflection of sort of profits after cost. It's your return on sales. And so you can see that they've been able to sort of maintain a stable operating margin at about 15% throughout. Next, we'll talk about how the company is financed, sort of. So going over the basics, there are 2 ways you can finance a company, either through equity or debt. And basic accounting equation stuff. All the assets that a company owns are either owned by the company itself, the equity sort of shareholders, or creditors who we owe money to. So our long-term debt in 2015 was at about 86 billion, and it's estimated to have climbed up to 98 billion in 2020. So we are seeing an increase there. However, equity, the parts of the company that we actually own, start out at 156 billion in 2015 and move up at a faster rate to 209 billion. So even though the company is incurring debt, it's also gaining ownership of more assets. So you see the sum of those two numbers, total invested capital, 243 billion in 2015. And with the growth of both of those numbers, it's reached 307 billion in 2020.
Christian, you're doing a great job. Let's just remind people that the way equity grows before we sell more stock, for instance, is by retaining earnings. So the reason equity has grown up so rapidly or so nicely is because the company's been profitable and it's retained those earnings in its shareholders' equity account, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So as a sort of reflection of that, we can see leverage, which is the percentage of our total invested capital that is, well, debt. And so you can see that of that 243 billion total invested capital in 2015, 35.7% of that is debt. And because equity is growing faster than our debt in 2020, it's actually gone down to about 31.9%. And we'll discuss the significance of that in the next slide. But first, we'll give some small regard to our return on investment and our return on equity. And, well, it's fairly self-explanatory. Return on investment, profit you're making off of your investment. Ideally, like if you're doing great, it's going to be about 12 to 15%. Toyota is keeping it in the 8 to 6% range. And for return on equity, again, a great sort of good range for that is 15 to 20, a little bit higher than return on investment. And they've kept it at about 10 to 12%. Okay. One more point regarding that. Or was it on something else?
Toyota's always been interesting to analysts. These rates of return on investment and return on equity don't mean that Toyota can't get a higher rate of return. They simply don't feel the need to. Toyota culturally has never been that greedy. On the other hand, they don't feel the need to, or in fact, they feel a need not to be financially risky. And so we see these nice low leverage ratios compared to other companies. And I'm sure that Christian will show us that in a moment. These are nice, comfortable leverage ratios. So you might ask, well, if Toyota doesn't feel so compelled to generate high rates of return, even though the return on equity, that's the rate at which shareholders' equity grows. That's what the return on equity is. So, the shareholders' wealth grows at a 10% or more a year after year. So what else is it that Toyota is investing in if its rates of return and its profit margins are good? They're quite good at 14 or 15%. But what else does Toyota want to spend its money on? And the answer quite simply is product development, research and development, dealer development. And it's because it invests in these long-term issues that Toyota has been so consistently a leader in the industry. Now, I'm sorry, I did it again, and I know you would have said a lot of what I just did, but it's really important for the people out there in cyberspace to get that message. And again, I'll try to control myself.
Well, it makes my job a little easier.
Okay.
And I think that's about all we have to say for that slide. So yeah, this is the competitors. So as you can see, again, going from sort of top to bottom, you can see that at $281 billion, Toyota has the highest sales of any of its competitors listed here. It has the second highest operating margin, just behind General Motors. It has the second highest debt and the highest equity, which totals it to the most total invested capital of any of the companies here. And again, even though they have the second highest debt, that's not necessarily a reflection of poor financial status. It's simply due to the scale of the company. And so we'll let return on investment and return on equity sort of take a back seat here, and we'll look at leverage here for a moment. So you can see that Toyota and Honda are roughly tied for the lowest leverage here, whereas other companies are 40, 60, 70s of percentages of leverage. You don't want to be playing poker with someone else's chips. Because Honda and Toyota, these Japanese manufacturers, have such a low percentage of debt, they're able to play more aggressively. They don't have, creditors barking at their back, which allows them to play into it more. They can make riskier plays. And with that little assessment of the financial conditions, I believe Heather is next up in the presenting.
While you were talking, I've been trying to put a couple of circles on the graph because it really points out, this graph does, we can see that Toyota's financial risk is far lower than Ford's. Ford's got, and again, for those of you who may not be familiar with how we're doing our numbers here, these are actually long-term leverage. They don't include the current portion of long-term debt. You can see up there, we just have long-term without the current portion. If we added current portion, these leverages, especially for Ford and General Motors, would be even higher. So consider Ford to have about 3/4 of its capital from borrowed money, and GM perhaps 2/3, and Toyota 1/3. So Toyota has a lot lower financial risk, and therefore it can be strategically more aggressive if it cares to. So it may see sometime a new market that it would like to get into, but maybe Ford's already there. Toyota can be strategically aggressive. It could attack Ford if it wanted to in a desirable market. And Ford, because it's up to its eyeballs in debt, it would have to be very careful. It probably could not reply, especially if a lot of capital was needed, whereas Toyota could build a plant, develop a new product, open a bunch of distributors, and poor old Ford with a leverage that high would just have to stand around and watch while Toyota took the market. So when you've got leverage that low, you can be strategically aggressive. And this, again, for those of you in cyberspace, this is a principle of strategic management that we try to teach in our courses on international business, and definitely on strategic management, which these students will be in next year. But when you've got, you can manage your strategic options financially. Your financial position enables you either to be strategically aggressive or necessarily conservative. And so in the case of Ford and General Motors, they can't be aggressive the way Toyota, and it's kind of a cultural thing, isn't it? Because we see another company that's similar to Toyota, if I can get it here. And there it is, Honda, the other Japanese company, right? So you sort of get a lesson here. Financial conservatism is a characteristic of Japanese companies. Okay.
Okay. We have Heather with international production and sales.
Okay, so this is just a brief listing of Toyota's overseas business. They manufacture in 27 different countries, including Japan. Some of the most notable is the US, of course. China, Brazil was the first foreign country to have a Toyota manufacturing plant. Toyota's vehicles are marketed and sold in over 170 different countries, which is pretty much most of the world. Below that, I've listed 7, the US, Japan, China, the European Union, Brazil, and Mexico, and India. I've listed these here because these are the 7 countries and regions that we will be analyzing during this presentation, looking at Toyota's business and manufacturing in those countries. All right. This is a picture that I found on Quitco's website. They're an auto parts distributor, and this was taken from their database, which shows which cars are the top searched in each country. And if you look closely, you can see that Toyota is the top searched car brand in over 50 different countries, which is about a quarter of the world. So this is just an example to show how dominant Toyota is in the global car industry.
In the mind's eye
Mm-hmm.
of the consumers.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have environmental trends and issues, and Heather is going to explain that.
Mm-hmm. So just to talk about the drivers of demand, or essentially why do people want to buy Toyotas or Toyota's vehicles? So the first reason, of course, is price. It has to be consistent with the consumer's income. And fortunately, most of Toyota's products are generally affordable. So that means a lot of everyday customers, middle class, lower middle class, can afford Toyotas, as well as the upper class, because they do offer some more luxurious products. For related goods and services, this is discussing complementary goods like gas and repair fees. Because Toyota focuses a lot on efficiency and quality, customers will often pay less in gas and less for repair fees because the cars are more efficient and they last longer, which means they won't break down as often. And substitutionary goods are describing other goods that could be substituted for Toyota's products, like Ford's cars, General Motors, Honda's, just other cars in the same sort of price range. And because I apologize, I'm not as focused as I should be. Toyota is viewed as being high quality, so they're often chosen over Ford or General Motors or other car companies like that. For taste and preferences, Toyota's products appeal to a great number of consumers because of their size. They're good for families, their style, they're very sleek and modern. Features like safety features, they have advanced airbags and guiding systems that appeal to a lot of older drivers, especially, who need more safety features when on the road. And lastly, expectations. Consumers expect certain things from certain brands, and as Toyota is ranked in the top 5 companies in the US for car quality, safety, and resale value, customers look at these things and they see a product that is a good investment, it'll last them a long time, and it'll keep them and their family safe. All right, you can move on.
I think another item in that expectations category is reliability. And we know one of the things we study in strategic management is exactly what is quality. And in one case, it's excellence. In the other case, it's reliability. You can count on it, doesn't break, and that sort of stuff. I remember in the old days when Toyota first came to the United States. Believe it or not, I'm that old. I really remember. But their cars looked like sardine cans. They were sort of square, not very classy. And I remember that there was somebody that I did business with, and this guy got one of these sardine cans. And year after year, he kept that damn sardine can. And pretty soon I said, why are you driving that sardine can? He says, because there's nothing wrong with it. He says, I'm up to 150,000 miles now, and it's got great gasoline mileage, but you know what? I haven't had to have any repair bills on it. I thought, oh God, geez, my car's not that good. And in the subsequent years, of course, Toyota got stylish too. But Toyota's always been recognizable for its very reliable cars. They don't break.
All right, this looks like me again. Here we have a couple of economic indicators in our key countries: Brazil, China, India, Japan, Mexico, the United States, and the European Union. So GDP, as you know, is a measure. It's fairly useful in determining a country's wealth. It's the value of all the finished goods and services that that nation produces. And I'll say that that little note on the side that says the info is from worldbank.gov, that's incorrect. I simply forgot to remove that note. The information has since been resourced from the International Monetary Fund.
Yeah, okay. I'll get rid of that for you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anything particularly remarkable about this?
Well, about this graph, first of all, you can see all those countries taking a dip in the sort of 2008 recession. And perhaps the most important thing is India's growth rate compared to China's.
Yeah.
India is represented by the yellow line. I apologize that that doesn't pop more. But you can see that China has had a huge GDP growth rate throughout the entirety of this graph, maintained a #1 position since 2000. But if you look at India's, it has the second highest throughout. And right before 2020, it looks like that's 2019, the growth rate of India actually surpassed China. And so with that growth rate, we're going to see an effect on the total GDP a few slides from now.
Yeah, the outlook is for China just because it's more mature. It's not a negative comment. It's just that, when you get that big, it's hard to have high proportionate growth rates. But India is growing somewhere around 7% and will continue to outdistance China, which means in the long term, we can see India catching up with China. And that has some real interesting ramifications, not least of which for car companies, because, as economies grow, so does the demand for cars.
So here we see the GDP per capita. This is more a measure of individual wealth. At the top, you can see the United States, followed by Japan and the European Union. And the remainder of our countries are sort of congregating down at the bottom there. But again, you can see China coming and peaking over those other countries. And you can see that India has sort of broken off from that flat rate, and they're also beginning to rise. All right, next slide, please. Now this is the big dramatic graph. This is the total GDP, the value of all the products and services that these nations have produced. And as you can see, as of about 2015, China has surpassed the United States and the European Union as the well, I suppose, the largest producers in the world. And so they're projected to continue to grow in 2020. And again, we see India breaking off from that flat curve and reaching a period of sustained growth going into the future.
Yeah, it's too bad India's line is yellow because it's difficult to see, but I think if we are able to focus on that line, we can see that the growth rate is increasing. So this is an accelerating, a positive accelerating function. And as I said, in time, among other things, it'll catch the US and Europe and then continue on to catch China. And that has some real interesting implications for forecasting purposes.
All right, so here we can see the unemployment rates. We see that Brazil is incredibly volatile, just due to their sort of political landscape. The euro area is comparatively high when we're looking at other developed nations. We have the United States, which looks like it was hit the hardest back in that 2008 recession. And then down at the bottom, we have a sort of lump of the rest of our nations who are clinging to a 5 or below unemployment rate. And of course, these projections here aren't factoring in this recent coronavirus thing, which is sure to have a sizable impact on unemployment if you've been watching the news.
It sure will. And if you look at the purple line, back in 2008 and 9, that rapid increase and then gradual decrease. If you had to guess what the impacts of the coronavirus will be, probably the pattern will be something like that purple line, except based upon what already has been recorded, the unemployment rate is going to get a lot higher than 10% temporarily. But it'll do something we would imagine sort of like that purple line looks right now, except that regrettably, it's going to go higher. Did you all see the news release today? Some 26 million people are unemployed in the United States today, according to the unemployment application records. And of course, those are not all the people that are unemployed. Those are the people that went to the unemployment office. So it's more than 26 million people. My heaven, we haven't seen anything like that. There's some very interesting literature in the current economic news literature about this, not least of which is there are people in government, healthcare, frankly, education, they're still employed. And then there are people who work in restaurants and other industries, such as airlines, that are unemployed. So, you know, the unemployment is really worse than we hear about, because in the industries that are affected, it's proportionately a lot greater. But we essentially have developed into an economy of the haves and the have-nots. So doctors, high-tech employees, maybe professors can go buy cars. But the poor folks who are in airlines, by way of example, they're not going to be able to buy cars, are they? Now, that has a whale of an impact on Toyota, because Toyota is going to have to design its marketing, its media, its various approaches to interesting people in buying cars to adjust to the target markets, which have changed a great deal in just a short space of time.
Okay, and here we have the inflation rates measured by percent change in average for the year. Here again, we see that Brazil has been volatile, owing that to its political landscape. India has also seen some volatility in its inflation rates, but has managed to stabilize. And here we see an actual downward dip around 2008. Because, you know, some inflation is healthy, rapid inflation is not healthy. Deflation, to my understanding, is an indication that things are in a bad way. And here we're actually seeing that as of 2008. Since then, our inflation rates have mostly stabilized at or below 5% and are projected to do so, well, up until recently, are projected to do so going into the future.
Yeah, and of course, these are IMF projections, and they were done before the coronavirus. An interesting little mental exercise is to take a look at these projections since about 2018, because the numbers aren't final for 2019. But you can see the IMF as these nice, flat, regular projections. But that's not the way the real world has been, is it? So
Yes.
supposing that we went back to look at the IMF projections in 2000, we would see something like this flat, you know, bunch of curves back here, right? And yet that's not the way the real world turned out. And so here we see these messy economies like India and Brazil, very disorderly, very, very unstable. And, you know, if you're Toyota or any other car company, how do you feel about investing in a manufacturing facility in India or Brazil? Does that look like a good idea? Maybe not, right? And yet, what's the problem? India is a really growth economy. It's a big economy for the future. So it's messy. It's definitely, you know, scary, risky. And yet, do you avoid India? Well, that's the issue, isn't it?
All right, so here we can see currency exchange rates expressed in the amount of US dollars you can get per currency. And we see that the euro has, you know, it's weightier than the US dollar is. You can purchase several US dollars for a lower amount of euros. Brazil, it's higher than the other currencies, but still less than the US dollar. The others have, well, sort of kept at that low standing, especially when you consider the Japanese yen is something like a penny, I believe, in the conversion rates. You know, these are simply reflections of how easy it is for a country to purchase United States goods. So here the Europe is going to be able to purchase them more easily because their currency is a little weightier than ours, whereas these other countries are going to have difficulty, with the exception of maybe China, just because of the long-standing, you know, trade that we have between us. We're buying a lot from China. So, oops, I dropped my laser pointer. All right, and here we have the real effective exchange rates. I believe this is based on, you know, a basket of goods or some such that are designed to sort of gauge how effective that currency is going forward. And so 2010 is sort of the point of reference here. And from there, we can see currencies that have either gained traction or lost some over the course of those 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And so you see Europe and India have sort of stayed course. China and the United States have gained a little bit. Japan, Mexico, and Brazil, however, have lost a bit of their value in their currency.
Okay.
All right, here are the lending interest rates. You know, the higher these lending rates are, the less inclined people are going to be to take out loans and spend money on things, say houses or cars. We can see that Brazil's interest rates are astronomical. But for the rest of these countries, they've sort of stayed at or below 20%. So nothing too divergent there aside from Brazil. All right, and I believe Heather is next on the presentation order.
Yep. All right. So here we can see the past 20 years in population trends for both China and India. And these are set aside from the other countries because they are significantly higher. So it skewed the graph a little. And also because there's some interesting things happening in this graph. If you notice towards the end of the red line, China's population rate is flattening out, and it's projected to soon begin to decline in the next probably 5 to 10 years. This is mostly due to the one-child policy, which was enacted several years ago. As for India, the population is expected to overpass China within the next 5 to 15 years is the general projection. If the trends continue as projected, India's population will actually become 33% larger than China's within the next 15 years, which is pretty significant and will cause a lot of changes in their economic strength. For this one, all the population rates seem pretty standard. They're growing slowly, but they're still increasing gradually. But if you look at the red line, which is Japan, they have flattened out and have begun to decline. And there's a few things that can happen because of a decline in population. One is the decrease in the labor force, which will affect how many people you can get to work for your company. And this will also affect the age demographic, which means at some point there will be a lot more older people than there will be younger people. And therefore there won't be enough young people working to support the older people, which will affect just how the older people are being taken care of.
So if you're Toyota, if we needed to be reminded again, this certainly is a reminder that Toyota, to be successful, must be a participant in multiple countries' economies and have its operations located in those countries, because there's just not a lot of growth potential in Japan, is there?
Nope. All right, this is back to Christian.
Hello again. All right. So this is a global market breakdown. This shows the shares of various auto companies. And here, taking up the #1 spot, you can see the subject of our presentation, Toyota. Based on this market breakdown, it's followed by Volkswagen, Ford, Honda, Nissan, and so forth, with about half of the market taken by other non-top 10 competitors. And understandably, Toyota is going to be under a lot of pressure to try and maintain that #1 spot going forward. How it plans on doing that we'll go over in later slides. But yeah, #1 spot with about $279 billion in revenue as of 2019. Next slide, please. Here we have the United States market shares, and if you'll notice, the United States market is largely dominated by United States companies. GM taking up the front, Ford taking up the #3 spot, and then we have sort of European and Asian companies taking up the remaining spots. Toyota is unique in that it has the #2 spot. And these, it has strategies to enter the US market that we'll discuss later on. Here we have the Chinese market, and there was a little bit of disagreement over, I'll say, the validity of this particular breakdown. This puts Volkswagen at about 1/4 of the Chinese market, followed by Honda, then Toyota taking up about a 10% spot. I did hear that US sort of auto manufacturers have about 1/4, but in looking at sources, I couldn't find a source that agreed with that statement. And according to a certain Reuters article, United States manufacturers only make up about 10% of the market share in China, but that's a matter of dispute.
Oh my,
So-
it certainly should be. Um, I think we may even have a slide here, but the two largest auto companies in China are Volkswagen and General Motors. Buick is very popular in China, but what we don't see, of course, is the other General Motors brands, such as Cadillac, which is also popular. I'm not sure about Chevrolet and GMC, but this graph is from carsalesbase.com. And it's unfortunate that we don't see General Motors as a whole, because if we did, it's pretty well established that General Motors would be second behind Volkswagen and very closely tied. So yeah, this slide is, Christian's done a good job. He got great slides, and they're very definitive. But this particular slide is disturbing just because it doesn't have General Motors as a whole company.
Thank you, sir. All right. So here we see the European market shares, and much like the US is a US market, Europe is a European market. So here we have Volkswagen taking up front with a quarter of the European market, followed by PSA, which I believe is a French company, as is Renault. And then you see Hyundai, BMW, Fiat, and so on. And Toyota only has about 5% of this market. And this one is interesting because, as you can see, the Indian market share is dominated by Maruti Suzuki. And so Maruti Suzuki is actually an alliance between the local Indian company, Maruti, and the larger company, Suzuki. And I had a couple of notes right here. Let me just look over. Here we go. So this alliance was formed around the 1980s. That was when, Toyota was sort of making its entry into the United States. And they've become established within the Indian market, which is part of the reason Toyota and other companies are having difficulty getting into it. Their focus is on compact cars. Maruti Suzuki has about 3,000 dealers in India. And they're focused on cost efficiency, locally sourcing their technology. And part of the reason they're so appealing is because of their high resale value, because the resale of a vehicle is I suppose, an important factor in India when they're thinking about buying their cars.
That's a very good point.
And so this concludes my market breakdown.
It's kind of interesting that Hyundai holds a larger position than Toyota. Toyota really hasn't gotten its act together in India, has it?
They've been late to entry, and that will be discussed further.
Okay.
Okay, next we have the country business analysis, and Heather is going to talk about this.
Yep. So first, I have done Porter's diamond analysis. The goal of this analysis is to explore whether or not the different countries' economies support the business of Toyota.
Oh, thank you, Heather. I do wish that our other teams would do that. Simply explain what the purpose of these models are for. Thank you.
So first, I was looking at factor conditions, which is basically labor and materials, whether or not the countries have the proper supply of skilled labor and materials such as steel, tires, aluminum, oil, and things like that. And then I've ranked them according to the research that I did. This ranking is subjective, so not everyone would agree with me, but this is just how I felt that they should be sorted. Second, I Second, I was looking at demand conditions. This includes predominantly road infrastructure. The percentage of paved to unpaved roads especially plays a big part. This looks at disposable income and the general income of families and individuals. Also unemployment rates, whether or not people have an income to even buy a car with. Next, I looked at rivalry. Healthy domestic rivalry is good for companies because it leads to innovation. The more companies in a market pushes each company to create new products and investigate new technology, and that is always good for different industries. And finally, I looked at related and supported industries. In this case is predominantly suppliers, whether or not these countries have strong, reliable suppliers of the raw materials like steel, aluminum, and oil. And I've ranked these all according to the research I found, and my conclusions are in the next slide.
Okay. Golly, you did a good job on that.
Thank you. All right, so my findings were that the most attractive country to support Toyota's business was the United States. This is because it has great road infrastructure. Most of its roads are paved and well maintained. People have a higher rate of disposable income, and up until the coronavirus, we have a decently low rate of unemployment. After this year, we're not really sure where that's going to take us, but it doesn't look too great. But other factors are we have a good supply of skilled labor, plenty of access to raw materials such as oil and steel, and we have a lot of strong suppliers. And there is a lot of high domestic rivalry, which pushes Toyota to continually improve its product selection. On the other side, the least attractive country that I discovered is India. And this is because while it does have a good labor supply, there are lots of people to work in manufacturing plants. It has very poor road infrastructure. There's lots of unpaved roads. They're often packed, and they're often filled with people and cows and motorbikes, and not really conducive to proper traffic flow. There aren't as many suppliers of raw materials, and they are more unreliable. And while there is average rivalry in the industry, it is not a lot to push innovation. There is a lower amount of disposable income, and there's a higher rate of unemployment, which means that people won't be able to afford more expensive cars.
Again, what a super job, bud. I don't know how you chose these two pictures, but wow, are they great for comparison. These are just super. Now, depending upon when this photograph was taken, I'm in one of those cars on the Los Angeles 407 freeway. That I've spent a lot of time on that road, and so one of those cars is probably the one that I rented. It's headed toward the Los Angeles airport, I might add, and I'm probably late. And I'm also using some very foul language because it's about 5 o'clock. The flight goes at 5:45, and I'm stuck in the traffic, afraid that I'm going to miss my flight. That was a very regular occurrence for me during my busiest years. One of those white buildings off on the right and in the distance, I'm not sure of this, I'm really not, but well could have been Toyota's building. When you drive down this highway, there's a sign on the side of the highway of the building, and it says Toyota, and that's Toyota's headquarters in the U.S. It's in Los Angeles, and it's right off the 407 freeway. So, boy, did you bring a lot back to my memory when you showed me this picture, including my high blood pressure. It was these were very wonderful years for me to have the privilege of working with so many companies and helping them map their future. On the other hand, missing those flights was And I did. I missed them. I just didn't plan my time very well.
uh All right, so the next model that I used is Porter's Five Forces, and this, the general key to this is to estimate profit potential in different countries. And it's important to note that each of these forces push profit down. So in this case, the lower the number, the more attractive it is. We want lower numbers in this case.
That's right.
So in the case of rivalry, I looked at how many auto companies are in each market, how many are vying for the same customer pool. The more there are, like in the case of the US, the harder it will be to make profit because there's just so much competition. For threat of new entrants, one thing that is good about the auto industry is that there's lots of barriers to entry. You'd need significant access to capital. You'd need so many engineers developing technology and new vehicles. Like, it's a very difficult industry to enter. So it's good that most of these numbers are decently low. For threat of new substitutes, or sorry, threat of substitutes in general, the higher numbers are due to countries that have a lot more focus on public transit, like subways and trains, and also motorbikes and three-wheelers, as we see in India a lot. So people are less likely to choose buying their own car when they can just take the subway or grab a taxi every day. For supplier power, I looked at whether or not suppliers control the costs of raw materials. Do they have the power to drive them up? And in the case of buyer power, I looked at whether or not the buyers control the prices of the final products and whether they have the control to drive them down. And according to my research, I ranked them accordingly, and my conclusion is on the next slide.
You shall have an A. This is just wonderful.
Thank you. All right, so I was a little surprised by this after I added up the totals, but according to my research, I identified Mexico as having the highest profit potential. And this sounds a little strange because you wouldn't think of Mexico, but I realize it's because there is a moderate amount of industry rivalry and a moderate threat of substitutes. There is a need for cars because they have a lot more open roads. And there's low supplier power, so suppliers don't often control the costs of raw materials. And for the lowest profit potential, I found again to be India, because they have a very high substitution rate. As you saw in the picture a couple slides back, people are often walking or riding motorbikes, or a lot of times they're in three-wheelers, and they don't choose to buy cars. And there's also a high buyer power because of the low income in most of India. The prices of the products need to be lower because people can't afford expensive cars. All right. So the next analysis is a cage analysis, which looks at the differences between Japan, which is our reference country, and the rest of the countries that they manufacture and sell their products in. So for cultural distance, I looked at—
Why do we do cage?
we do cage to look at just how
The barriers to entry, that's an A
Yeah.
minus. We're back to an A minus. But anyway, barriers to entry. Also, once the company is in the country, then growth potential. So we can use cage for two different purposes. If we're not in the country yet, then the cage provides us with input into barriers to entry, and this may help us understand the five forces too. You know, the threat of new entrants is impacted by barriers to entry.
Mhm.
But once we're in China or once we're in India, then the question is what's the growth potential here? And Cage gives us insight into answers for both of those questions. Okay.
All right, so because Japan already exists in all of these countries, they already manufacture there, we looked at the barriers to growth or expansion within the countries.
Right.
And so for cultural distance, I looked at presence of language barriers and the difference in social norms, the way people interact with each other, the way business is conducted, like with other companies. For administrative distance, I looked at if there's a common currency. I looked at the exchange rates, if there is any political hostility, like between within a domestic government or between different countries, if there's a higher rate of institutional corruption, because that plays a big factor in business.
That's a good point.
For geographic distance, just how far away the countries are, because this plays a part in shipping costs. And even within a country, the road quality can determine whether or not materials can be transported between facilities, how goods can be transported to dealerships, and things like that. For economic distance, I looked at the difference in consumer incomes and the differences in the cost and quality of resources like materials and labor. And I used these to rank the countries, and my conclusion is in the next slide.
I love the way you're doing this analysis of these things. Rarely do I hear somebody say, I looked at.
All right, so the question here is, where is growth facilitated? Where is growth most likely within a country?
That's it. You do know what it's for.
I do. Yeah, I just had to get there.
I'll give you your A back.
Thank you. All right, so I chose the United States because between Japan and the US, the cultures are more similar in how business is conducted. Business is more formal. People often work harder and longer hours, so it's a lot more compatible between the countries. It's geographically not too far away from each other, and within the US, the road infrastructure is good for transportation of goods and materials. The economy is pretty similar. Consumer incomes and resource costs aren't too different from each other, so it's very compatible, and growth is very likely. For where growth is resisted, the two countries that were tied for the lowest ranking were Brazil and Mexico. And there are several reasons that I found for this. If you look at the Asian culture and the South American culture, they are very different in how they approach business. They're very different in how people interact with each other. Asian cultures are usually very formal. There's lots of rules about how you conduct yourself, but in South America and Latin countries, people are more familial and friendly, and there's a lot more, I don't know if there's a proper word for it, but people are a little less formal in how they interact with each other. Administrative differences. In South America, you can sometimes find higher rates of institutional corruption, which affects business. And there's also a larger difference in disposable income. So if we're looking at growth in Brazil and Mexico, it's decently less likely that the growth rates will be as high as we'd like them to be.
And so based on this, what did General Motors do?
General Motors pretty much pulled out of South America.
Yeah. Yeah, they took a look at this and decided it's, the juice ain't worth the squeeze.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that General Motors was motivated to be the biggest company in the industry. Now Mrs. Vera has changed that.
Mm-hmm.
And her priorities are profitability. So she's looking at the five forces. She's looking at Cage. And believe it or not, they actually do that stuff. The analysts do. And so the result was that General Motors left both India and South America in order to focus on regions and countries where profit potentials were greater. And the results are in General Motors numbers. Now, Toyota already has good numbers. So Toyota's got to think about the longer term strategy. So its priorities are a little different from General Motors, but it's interesting that these things really, these kinds of analyses really do affect corporate decisions.
Yep.
I'm trying to advance the slide and it's not letting me. I'll do it. There we go.
All right, so this is the last model that I use, Hofstede's model, and it's my favorite one because it deals a lot with psychology and human behavior. The first element is power distance, or the way that power is distributed between members of a company or just members of society. One thing to look at is there a clear hierarchy in society? Are there different tiers of people? That you can see a lot of this in India with the caste system and things like that. This affects interactions between people in a company or just people in general in society. And if you look, Mexico has the highest power distance out of all the countries, which means there are more rules about who you can speak to, how you can speak to people. The people in the higher tiers of a company or society have a lot more power and a lot more say over what happens.
Incidentally, these numbers are not precise. So is there another country that's essentially at the same level of Mexico?
Yeah, China.
Yeah, sure.
They have a lot of the same sort of elements.
Yeah, very stratified. Yeah.
For the second element, uncertainty avoidance, this plays into whether or not societies are willing to take risks. This also discusses the tolerance of new ideas, whether or not people are willing to move forward and do something new, or just work with the old ways. So if you look at the numbers, I've circled the important ones. Like Japan has a very high uncertainty avoidance. They're less likely to take risks, less likely to work with new technology. And China is the exact opposite direction. They have a very low uncertainty avoidance, which means they move forward, they adapt, they make calculated risks, and they are much more likely to try newer things.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the industrial practice in several Chinese industries is to introduce a new concept, a new technology, a new method, and then improve it afterwards.
Yep.
So, you know, the new thing may be the new thing, but it may not be the best thing for a couple of years. But the Chinese will go on and introduce it because it's there, and they just are not as concerned about risk, and so we just move right ahead.
Yep.
From a standpoint of you're interested in psychology, I'm interested in strategy. This has a whale of an impact on the outcomes of first movers and initiatives. You know, China may be is likely to be a first mover. That gives them an advantage. On the other hand, they may stub their toe, which gives other countries the ability to counterattack.
Yep.
This your circling of these two items from high and low is very, very helpful. Go ahead.
All right, so the next one is individualism, and this basically looks at individualism versus collectivism. So for an individualistic society, there is a lot less group loyalty, a lot less conformity. People are typically in it for themselves. They're more willing to break ties with their family, with companies. They don't feel tied down by loyalty to many things, so they're more likely to switch jobs or take new ventures and things like that. So if you look at the chart, you can see that the US is very big on individualism, which makes a lot of sense. This is the Wild West where we're looking for new things and we're out to make our own success. But China is a very collected society. There's a lot of company loyalty. There's a lot of conforming to the typical way of doing things, and they're less likely to go outside of the norm. The next one is masculinity, and this isn't a gender thing. This masculinity is often associated with being inquisitive, being assertive, being achievement driven, working towards high success rates.
Yep, you got it.
I'm sorry?
You got it.
Oh, thank you. This is as opposed to femininity, which would be less assertive and focuses more on being cooperative within a company and within a society. For long-term orientation, this is looking at, it's generally looking at economic development, whether or not a country can adapt, is looking towards the future, or in the case of being short-term oriented, they would value tradition and how things are done in the past. And so if you look at Japan's number and Mexico's number, Japan is focused on moving forward and adapting, while Mexico is focused on valuing tradition and how things have been done before. So this is my conclusion from that model. And I just took a look at how this would affect different areas of business. This affects investments and financial planning, because depending on how much risk a society is willing to take, this will dictate how people invest, how long it takes people to jump into a new venture, and things like that. For marketing, there'll be a big difference in how products are marketed to the general public, because in the United States, a new car will be marketed as, buy this product and you'll stand out among your peers. But in China, it would be marketed as, buy this new product, you'll fit in with your peers. And so there's a big difference between societies in that respect. Corporate structure and function. If there's a higher power distance, such as in Mexico, there'll be a big difference between how people interact with each other in companies and in society. It's more divided, the tiers of people, as I mentioned before. It affects relations and negotiations between societies and between companies, how people communicate with each other, how just the general willingness to negotiate between companies, and also product development. Some societies expect more lavish products and more like fancier styles, or some other societies value practicality.
Right. Look, we've been at this now for just about an hour and a half. So wherever we can pick up the pace a little bit, we need to do that.
Okay, I can go quicker in the risk.
Okay. No, your comments were great. But again, our problem is that we've got this time issue. So wherever all of us can, I need to not interrupt you as much. You guys need to go through your slides just a little bit faster. Okay.
All right, so here I did a risk analysis on the 7 countries and regions, and I looked at 3 different factors: economic risk, political risk, and financial system risk. And I used a lot of the numbers that Christian provided earlier to determine which countries would be the best and worst to invest in and do business in. So these first 2, the United States and the European Union, have a very low level of country risk. They're very stable. They have healthy economies. There's a lot of growth there. If you move to the next one.
You want to go next?
Yeah. Japan has a decently low level of country risk. They have low interest rates, low exchange rates, and they have a moderately high GDP calculated for PPP. The next one. China also has a moderate level of country risk. They have a high GDP, there's rapid GDP growth, but there are moderately high unemployment rates and inflation rates happening there. For Mexico, they also have a moderate level of country risk. While they do have low exchange rates and low interest rates, they do have high inflation rates and their GDP is considerably lower.
Yeah, and we can't disregard political risk.
Yes.
Mexico's just gone through a change of government, for instance.
Mhm.
So that always will affect a decision to make an investment to put a new plant in place, for instance, or make some other long-term investment.
Mhm. Brazil is one of the last two countries, and they have a very high level of country risk. As you mentioned, for Mexico, they also have a lot of political volatility happening with their political landscape, as Christian referred to as. They have a high unemployment rate, there are high inflation rates, and there are very high interest rates on loans. And finally, India also has a very high level of country risk. Their economy is not quite as stable. They do have a lot of political tension. Their GDP is significantly lower, and they also have high inflation rates. And this is just a comparison of all the countries to each other to give a visual of which ones are the riskier to invest in and do business in. So as you can see, Japan, the US, the European Union have a decently low amount of risk, but India especially and Brazil have a very high amount of risk.
They do indeed.
So after this risk assessment, and we found that the highest risk is in Brazil and India, what would this mean for companies like Toyota? Well, as we will discuss in a little bit, this will lead to very unique entry and growth strategies. Toyota has employed a lot of joint ventures and alliances to make their way into China, especially because of social tensions I'll mention in the next slide. They'll also need to make very calculated and wise investments and make sure that they are insured on all fronts in case things go badly in a country. They need to set up contingency plans and exit strategies in case they need to pull out, like Ford and GM did, if the society goes downhill, if the political outlook looks bad. They have that set in place. All right, so this is a strategic issues summary. I'm looking at problems in this slide. So as far as production goes, fossil fuels aren't going to last forever, and they're going to become increasingly more expensive as they become more scarce. So what Toyota needs to do is to focus on alternative fuel sources if they still want to remain dominant in the next 20, 30 years. They also, now more than ever, need to focus on their CO2 emissions and their environmental responsibility. They need to look into more eco-friendly production, different forms of production that can reduce the carbon footprint in the environment. And this will be a big investment to their production.
Okay, again, we need to keep moving.
Yeah.
Let's go to social.
All right, so social issues, one of the biggest ones that we've talked about before is their tensions with China, which happened after World War II and the Japanese occupation. And this just affects how Toyota can, as a Japanese country, has been able to move in and do any business there at all because of the way China views Japan.
Yeah, this is critical. We've talked about it a lot, but I'm not sure the folks who are watching this video have heard those conversations. So we need to let them know that this really is a major issue.
Mm-hmm.
During prior to the Second World War, Japan invaded China, occupied cities on the Chinese coast. The capital had to be moved from what was then called Peking, now called Beijing, into the inland to a city called Xi'an, which I visited 3 years ago. But during that occupation, the Japanese were cruel in any number of ways. The men were put into labor camps and essentially worked till they died. Women were exploited for sexual reasons. And as a result, everyone who looks at that situation, including the Chinese, feel that it was really cruel. After the war, the Chinese continued to resent the Japanese very much. After the folks who survived had kids, they told their kids about it, and the kids resented the Japanese, and even the kids who are now having kids do the same thing. So for Toyota, the world's largest auto producer, is far from the largest auto producer in China. Why is that? Well, the primary reason is this reason: the cultural animosity between Chinese and Japanese. And it's deep-seated, and it will be very difficult for Toyota to overcome. Toyota has attempted to overcome it with alliances and joint ventures, and that's working. But Toyota is far from a leader in China, unlike elsewhere in the world. And this is the reason, and it's a big issue in the Toyota case. Okay.
Yep. All right. So some of the opportunities that Toyota has before them is especially alternative fuel sources. I looked into this a little bit, and the first is, of course, electricity. They're hybrid and electric cars, but other options are using ethanol and hydrogen as alternate fuel sources. And then other technological advances will be advanced safety features and self-driving cars, which might not actually be too far off from now. As far as emerging markets go, we just discussed China. And with more joint ventures and alliances, Toyota does have an opportunity to move into China that will be slow, and it'll take them a lot more work than it would in other countries. India, as a vastly growing economy, they have a big opportunity there to move in and offer a different selection of products that can target more low-income families, and they have an opportunity to do very well in India.
Okay, I will be explaining the business instructions. Okay. So this is just a breakdown of kind of their organizational structure, which I thought was really unique, just because not only do they have just 1 or 2 managers, you can tell they have 5 or 6. And so they broke it down between their office to their shop floor. So you don't have you have just one person overseeing the office and shop floor, but then it kind of breaks down into like, you have your managers watching over the office, and then you have it broke down into the shop floor. Like they kind of don't go together. They're kind of doing their own thing within their organizational structure.
And this would be for a local manufacturing facility, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so and you can actually go ahead. I'm just going to explain this on the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so the first approach that they use for operating methods is the just-in-time approach, which what it is Toyota. They only produce Toyota produces only what they order. Like, so when they get an order in or receive it, they make it then. They don't make extras. This is done through the Toyota's dealers, and they only produce what they need, so they don't have extra vehicle parts or inventory, and it is done right then, right there, so it can be on time.
For those of you who are watching the video, pay attention to the numbers on this slide: number 1, number 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, so the next method we have is the Kaizen. I believe that's how you say it.
Kaizen.
Kaizen strategy. And so this is something that they're always looking for improvement. They want to achieve the high quality in their products. You know, they don't want something going out, breaking. You know, they want to have that good name. They want to be known for, you know, having reliable, you know, vehicles and everything. And so this is just where they're always using this strategy to find improvements, to find, you know, ways to be better within their company.
In fact, this grew out of something called Kanban. This Kaizen. These two methods were developed by an American quality engineer, and try as he might, he could not get the American car companies to accept it. So he went to Japan, and they jumped on it. And the result was that the Japanese car companies outperformed the Americans. Later, the Americans realized their mistake and adopted these methods. But the Japanese taught the Americans about quality and process control because they learned from that American, and I've got a mental block on his name, so I'm not mentioning it, but it's widely known.
Okay, the next operation method we have is the Kanban
Oh,
system.
there it is.
And so this is to help to achieve the just-in-time approach,
Oh.
just because it tells you how many parts are used, when they're used, and where they're used at. So this prevents, you know, making, you know, too many parts, or, you know, not making enough. And this just, you know, helps, especially with the just-in-time approach.
Yeah, I'm actually going to do a little move here. I'm going to put that up above this because it's this Kanban system that made this happen.
Right.
And this is something separate. Okay.
Okay. So next, just market and sales. So I compared 2018 to 2019, and it's broke down vehicle sales per region. And so I predict, you know, just compared between the two, you can see that Toyota has steadily increased. I would say, my opinion is Toyota would likely still continue to increase. But then again, I'm kind of on the fence because, especially with the coronavirus going on, you know, depending on how long it goes on for, you know, that will definitely have an effect in their sales. But as far as looking back, you know, the past 2 years, you know, I would predict, you know, they would find a solution to keep steadily increasing in sales.
Yeah, what's remarkable here is that between these 2 years, there are no changes in the proportions of North America, Asia, and Europe. I guess there's 1 percentage point in Asia, even though it's so large. So Toyota, just as we've talked about before, is a very regular creature. And here we see resilience of the importance of their markets. And of course, what's also resilience is the unimportance of the developing markets. So that's an issue.
Okay, so next we have some technology functions. One thing that really stood out with me was their robotics. And so they introduced in 2004 trumpet playing robot, and it's multitask. It can do many things. You can continue.
Well, Toyota makes robots. It's actually in the robotics industry. And it makes robots, most importantly in Japan, to staff hospitals.
Right.
I think I've talked with this team about it before, but it's not that important for the project. But robots in Toyota's manufacturing operations, of course, are extremely important. And not only does it reduce dependence on labor, but it increases reliability because a robot can do the very same thing the same way every time. and even the best trained laborer can't do that well. So this is another one of those places where Toyota sort of moves ahead in technology.
Right. And that definitely surprised me, coming out with robots and doing, all these many things. You wouldn't think that a car company would come out with something like this. You can see the different types of robots they've came out with, what they do, how they help, with the rehabilitation centers, like you said, in the hospitals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, the next thing we have is CarPlay, which actually really surprises me that CarPlay, it's kind of like a pretty much, a more updated version of Bluetooth. And so I've done research on how Toyota has kind of like stayed out of putting CarPlay in, their vehicles and stuff. But they finally, I know there was a couple cars that they had put in the CarPlay in 2019 and kind of like testing it out to see how good it, would work, if people would buy the car or buy the different cars because of that extra technology function. And so they added that in. And then I'll turn it over to Christian.
All right. So in their technical functions, managing their various information and their technology, we'll tie it back into that Kaizen idea of continuous improvement. So Toyota has a standardized system to register new knowledge that they accumulate, and that's part of the way that they foster for the continuous growth of their business. They're acquiring practices and processes over the course of, their business life. And further, and this is just sort of aside, their production system stops for any sort of abnormality. If there's a problem on the line, they cut the cord and they make sure that that's fixed before they continue. Now, they have a number of R&D sites, 7 in Japan, 3 in China, 5 in the United States, located in California, Michigan, and Arizona, 3 in Europe, in Belgium, France, and Germany, and then 1 in Thailand, all by its lonesome. Next slide, please.
Thailand's not that big a place, I mean, one's enough.
Fair enough. So these are a couple of R&D, well, these are the R&D site activities that they have. You can see there's product planning, vehicle engineering, evaluation, so on and so forth. They have environmental focused activities. They have activities that focus on automated driving and artificial intelligence development. And I believe the one in Germany functions as a development base for motorsport or some such function of Toyota. I won't go too long with list items.
I think, of course, I'm not able to get this damn thing to do red for me, but if I could, I'd highlight these in red. There are some of these functions that are more impactful, perhaps, than others, and the basic research, because Toyota's a leader, but then artificial intelligence and automated driving and technology development, no question about that. That's those are really important in determining the future.
All right.
Christian?
Yes, sir. Here we have Toyota's basic strategy model, and as you can see, it is a hybrid between cost leadership and broad differentiation. In that cost leadership circle, they're trying to minimize their production costs to deliver value to the customer, and they're doing that through their, Kaizen, Kanban methods. They're just-in-time manufacturing, which minimizes production cost, response time, and waste. They aren't having to deal with having such large inventory. So they're doing cost leadership like that. And then broad differentiation, they're using innovation create unique and attractive products. And I apologize for reading that off, and so in addition,
These are important. No need to apologize. But I think that you've made a really good point, and that is that you know, in Toyota's case, it's not like some others where differentiation is more important than cost leadership, or cost leadership's more important. And in the case of Toyota, these are equally important priorities. Toyota's got to be different. It's got to have a better product. It's got to have better technology. For instance, it was the first to introduce the Prius, the battery, the hybrid car, the battery car. But it was also the first to introduce the hybrid in volume. On the other hand, Toyota must produce a car that is affordable. So they've got to do both, as do other auto companies. What's unique about Toyota is it's better at doing both than the other companies.
all right.
Is there anything you want to say about global, regional, and specialized?
Just that they have, they have a global lineup. They're a global company, so they have certain models which they offer across regions, and they have other regional models which they offer either exclusively in one area or that they're pushing more heavily in one area.
Yeah.
And of course,
what's the advantage of global?
the advantage of global,
Standardization, low cost, right?
yes, sir.
Okay. On the other hand, what's the advantage of regional? Differentiation in response to local market conditions.
Yes.
So these are diametrically opposed, and later on we'll probably get into international business models. And there are business models that respond to both of these needs. And in fact, there's one business model that responds to both.
All right, so here we have Ansov's matrix looking at Toyota's intensive growth strategies, how they're seeking to grow in various markets. So up there in the top left, we have product development, where they're creating new products for existing markets, such as the Avalon and the Mirai, which are coming out in the United States from 2020, 2021, new products going into the future in existing markets. In market penetration, we have existing products in existing markets. So this can involve, advertising activity. They're trying to push those sort of flagship cars that have been around for a while, and they're trying to continue those sales. So here we have the Corolla, Camry, the Prius in these developed economies. And bottom right, we have market development, selling existing products in new markets. They're trying to do this through entry into the new emerging markets, such as China and India, although the exact lineup may be a little different. And finally, we have product proliferation, where they're creating new products for new markets. So specifically, we have more compact cars that they're designing specifically for India and emerging markets. And then we have robots entering in onto the robotics scene. All right, next slide, please. So they coordinate their business, as far as the marketing side goes, through the aforementioned use of those regional models and focuses, and then the global ones. So in the US, they push the Toyota Tundra because, the full-sized pickup is sort of the last thing that the American manufacturers have that they're holding on to in the United States. So they're trying to stab at that by pushing the Toyota Tundra in the US. Whereas in Europe, they're selling the Lexus as a model car, and then pushing diesel and hybrid cars because that's where they're selling. And in China, India, and the emerging markets, they're of course building entirely new products. And then coordinating, I had one more point in that last one. This is sort of an important part.
I'm sorry, which slide do you want?
That one right there, that's good.
Okay.
So an interesting point, how they coordinate their production overseas is through the use of link points. So they have domestic plants in Japan, they have foreign plants overseas. they're linked together in such a way that if their foreign plant has a spike in demand, rather than just working that factory, wringing it out, trying to squeeze out more and more cars, they'll have a linked domestic plant in Japan produce more to accommodate that demand, and they'll ship them overseas to that location. Now I'm good for this.
Okay.
All right. So one of the reasons that Toyota is late to entering India is because of an old strategy that they had circa 2007 under their previous president, Hitachi Watanabe. And so their focus was not so much increasing consumer access by creating a lower price vehicle. Rather, they were hoping that they could innovate and find a new process which would create a lower cost car, and that the Indian market would eventually catch up to them through economic growth. And so their reasoning down the bottom, India will develop and demand will increase. They believe that quick entry through a cheap product will devalue Toyota's brand. And they were really holding on to the fact that Toyota delivers fair value. And they believed that even if it was at a premium cost in these emerging markets. So down there we have a quote from the older president. We may not necessarily be somebody's first car. We definitely want to be the second car. So it was a more passive stance. Their new strategy, however, focuses on partnership. Just as Suzuki partnered with, what was that company? I'm sorry, Maruti.
Yeah.
Just as Suzuki partnered with Maruti in the 1980s, Toyota is now trying to gain entry into the Indian market through partnering with Suzuki, which, if you'll remember, has a 50% market share. It's astronomical. And so Suzuki is giving Toyota compact models, which they can produce. Toyota is producing Suzuki vehicles in their Indian plants. These companies are purchasing stake in each other as part of that agreement. And finally, Toyota is sort of taking on some of Suzuki's practices in sourcing their parts locally.
What does this strategy remind you of?
What does this strategy remind me of?
The NUMMI in the
NUMMI.
United States. They've done this before, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and India is so important. Toyota has decided to partner with the leader in India in order to, again, just like NUMMI, each side's going to benefit. There's an interesting wrinkle, and down at the bottom, both companies will purchase stakes in each other, and those stakes are equity, stock. So it could be someday that these two companies merge. They're both Japanese, so that would be a reasonable thing to expect. But for the time being, these companies ought to be able to work very well together in India.
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's a car from my garage.
Yes, sir. And so just to sort of provide a point of reference, this is a car in India. And this is what is on the road. And it's not exactly what Toyota and Suzuki are producing. They're more compacts and hatchbacks. But this is what's available to these sort of low-income people. Those top out at like 30 miles an hour. So.
Nevertheless, there are a lot more of these on the road than there are conventional cars, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right, so some of the barriers to growth that Toyota is facing. So they're sort of late to the game in developing eco-friendly cars. They have a huge time investment that they need to expand because their business practices are something that need to be ingrained into their employees and the people they're working with. In order to get an effective Toyota manager, they have to be with a company for about 20 years by one estimate. And of course, implementing these production practices is difficult when you're sort of putting yourself in a region that doesn't readily understand it. You have to carry those practices over. As of late, global auto sales have been down, according to our lovely value line estimates. And that's something that all these auto companies are facing. And further, resources for Toyota are spread thin because they're investing in so many products and processes that there aren't enough personnel to go around. It's difficult to coordinate that across so many teams. More locally, they are, of course, facing difficulty in China. And again, we'll mention that late entry into India. And their sales have been stagnating in Japan. Further, their profitability is based on the shifting values of the yen, in relation to other foreign currencies.
I don't know how you did this, but what a cool slide when you're able to draw those lines to Japan and China. I haven't complimented you guys enough on the quality of your slides, but they sure are good.
Okay. All right, so these are the three main points that Toyota is doing in order to tackle those aforementioned challenges. So they're collaborating with other companies to increase their competitiveness, as we see them cooperating with Suzuki in India. They have a sort of track history of coordinating with other companies as well, Hyundai being an example off the top of my head. They're focusing on the development of smaller cars, and further, they've split the organization into independent product-focused companies because that allows them to better allocate that sort of thin personnel that we talked about previously. And I believe they've already done some of their major initiatives going into the future. We have the focus on electric vehicles. We have the Toyota Environmental Challenge of 2050, which is their sort of goal to reduce various carbon emissions and ecological footprints that the company is making, both through production and through the life cycle of the vehicle. They're trying to get it all down and trying to contribute positively to the environment. Then we have the Mobility for All campaign, Kinto Mobility Services, the partnership with SoftBank to form Monet Technologies Corp. And those are all sort of mobility focused. Mobility for All, that's focusing on mobility services and transportation solutions, particularly in those who are movement impaired. So think ramps and wheelchairs and accessibility in transit. Kinto is focused in Europe. It's a brand for their sort of ownership alternative service. They offer individual cars as well as fleets, and they offer full service leasing, car sharing, car pooling, and then subscription-based leasing. And then finally, we have the partnership with SoftBank and the Monet Technologies Corp. That's more focused in Japan. It's another mobility service, and I believe this is more focused on public transit, where they are developing, in particular, an autonomous bus. All right.
That's interesting stuff.
Isn't it?
I've just looked down below, and I don't see a slide with this information. So I'll put it in just real quick, and that is the, let's see, I'll see if I can put it in real quick. Maybe I have to do it with one of these guys. But I'll just slide it in there real quick, and that is the so-called international and I'm sorry to do this. And if I'm repeating something you've already done, stop me as soon as you know. But I just haven't seen it, so I don't think it's here. So the first international strategy, in fact, is called international, right? That's when we take an existing business model and duplicate it everywhere. So Holiday Inn or Hilton is a better example. I used to travel all over the world, all over. And I always chose Hilton because I knew I'd always get the same place and I'd be comfortable there. So in Xi'an, China, I mentioned earlier, way inland in China, I stayed in a Hilton because, I could have stayed in something more local, but I wanted a Hilton and I got it. The next one is the multinational, right? And the multinational is when we have a different business model for different markets, because different markets are just that. They're so different that we've got to differentiate. We've got to be responsive to local market conditions or we just won't be able to do business. The next one is the reverse, global. Whoa, 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 whoa. Boy, I messed up my typing. Global. That isn't working either. There we go. Often called global standardization. And the reason it's called global standardization is because whereas multinational seeks to respond to local market conditions, it's the reverse with global standardization. And the objective is low cost, of course, and reliability. And we've seen a lot of both of those in fact, all three of them, of these we've seen at Toyota. The fourth one, of course, is Toyota's, and it's the most difficult, and it's called transnational. And the transnational model simply mixes all of these up. Its formal description is that it responds to the demand for low cost and responsiveness to local market conditions. And you can find each one of these in Toyota, especially in their history. But I think today we would probably have to agree that Toyota's strategy is transnational, if only because it is so very complicated. Okay. Outlook. The phone is ringing in my office and I will neglect it. Go right ahead. Whose is this?
This is Christian's.
Okay. So here we see our 2019 estimate that we saw earlier, as well as the 2020 estimate. Our goal for 2024 is as represented by the value line estimate.
Right.
So 2020, we have $284 billion in sales. We want to have $305 billion for 2024. So we're going to need a $24 billion increase and an 8.5% increase.
From last year, from 2019.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So 14.5% for our operating margin. That's held steady. That is our goal in the future. There's no change. Said held steady. So our long-term debt, we're expecting to incur about $500 million, or 0.5%
Yeah.
from 2019. Equity, we're expecting to incur $260 billion, or 37. I'm sorry, I just realized I'm reading off the absolute values and not how much we're trying to get.
That's all right. We understand. A point that we're getting already with 14.5%, the sales growing, but not astronomically. Once again, this is a very regular company, isn't it? And yet, when we get to the equity, we've got this retention of earnings again and a nice increase. Go ahead.
And so, see, we have that 24.5% increase in total invested capital. Because we have such a small change in debt and such a noticeable change in equity, we can see that there is a reduction in our leverage because we're becoming less risky as we incur less debt than we are retained earnings and equity.
Which means that
We're able to
this
play more
company
aggressive.
has a lot of latitude, right?
Yes, sir.
It can, with financial risk that low, it can do pretty much whatever it wants. And once again, now these numbers did come from Value Line, and this Value Line analyst is obviously impressed by the sorts of things I mentioned earlier, but he or she, I think it's a he, certainly isn't casting Toyota in a greedy mold, right? We're going to go from return on investment of 7.5% to 6.5%. Oh, come on. I mean, we can, is that a goal? Is that really a goal? If you guys were setting goals for a company, would you set the goal for return on investment to go down? I don't think so. Or return on equity, the growth of shareholders' equity to drop from 11% to 9%. Somebody ought to take that Value Line analyst behind the woodshed and give him a little lesson. These are very timid objectives that way. Nevertheless, even though they're timid, we have a nice, regular, substantial increase in shareholder value, equity. So, yeah, they're timid. Will the shareholders be disappointed? I suppose shareholders are always disappointed, but they won't be that disappointed. So, yes, Toyota can do better than this, and they will.
Okay. Next, we have the international and domestic sales mix. And so for 2019, the foreign sales was 74%. And we predict that by 2024, their sales will still be keep increasing just due to technology functions that they have coming out. And in the next couple of slides, you'll see like the future of Toyota, of one of their big things that they're coming out with. So with how they're trying to grow the company, their sales should increase. Okay, so just some major challenges. Just the top 3 that I picked out was number 1, of course, the coronavirus. Especially who knows how long this is going to go on for, and that definitely has a major impact. Not only with Toyota, but with many industries in the United States. And then second, we have U.S. tariffs, which this causes prices of vehicles in the U.S. to increase. And so, who wants to pay, more than really what they have to? So that's just something, Toyota has to work on to try to get, costs down a little bit and to still make a profit and still, have business. Number 3, we have, just regulations. It's being more strict worldwide, especially to do business, internationally. So, they have to make sure they meet all regulations, all culture needs, make sure, how they do business in Japan, they're meeting them needs, versus how they do business here.
Maybe the biggest of the regulatory issues is India. Remember, India's government prefers Indian companies. Very difficult sometimes to, even once the regulations have been relaxed a little bit in India, practically not a lot has changed. Not only that, but the states, as they call them in India, like our states, have a lot more independence, and they also have regulations. So you may be approved in one state, but not another one. So India's a regulatory quagmire. I don't know where you got this graphic, but it's just perfect. Who did is it one person who did your slides? or did you all do these graphics and designs? But your design work on this PowerPoint file has just been super.
Thank you.
It was a combination of all three of us. Every slide that we presented, we prepared individually.
Okay. Huh. I think I know somebody who looks like that. Oh, that's the guy I see in the mirror. Never mind.
So next, Heather's going to talk about, the #1 issue, how the coronavirus has affected Toyota.
All right, so these are just a couple things that I came up with, because right now we're all wondering, how is this virus going to affect business and the economy globally? So the first few are production delays because of the shutdown. People can't get to work. Manufacturing has slowed. Exports and imports were one of the first things to shut down, especially coming from China, which will definitely hurt, especially the U.S.'s production. This could lead to resource scarcity, which will increase the price of materials. Because of the incredible unemployment rates, people are out of work. They don't have an income, so they're not going to be buying cars anytime soon. This will lead to a loss of sales for Toyota. The situation with the stock market and the fact that people are pulling out of industries right now, that's going to affect just the equity that companies have, and employee layoffs for the actual companies, for Toyota. If they lose too much money, they're going to have to start laying off
That's going to start it all over again, right?
Yeah.
As people are unemployed, they can't buy cars, and on we go.
Yeah.
And what's really anxiety producing is that although we've got lots of theory, nobody really knows exactly how this thing is going to end, how it's going to play out, if it'll end at this year, or when we have the flu season again next year, it starts all over. So these are all good concerns. Next item.
Okay, so our last slide is just the future of Toyota. So, overall, we've talked about how Toyota has really harped on their expectations is to make, their products high quality products. And I found this, one of their other big things is mobility for all. And so this is just a new transportation, cars, buses, any kind of transportation systems they're trying to come out with to help diverse, the range of mobility services for everyone around the world. So, if you're in a wheelchair, that's not going to stop you from driving a car or taking a bus. And I really, like what Toyota is, working on today to better, the future for definitely people, that's, that's in a wheelchair that may not, be able to drive like a regular car. And so this is just some pictures of ideas that they're coming up with in the future. And I think this will definitely set Toyota aside from other companies that may have not even thought of this yet.
Good points. Okay, I'm going to turn this recorder off just as soon as I can, but if I can, I guess I've got it off now. I just want to tell you that I think you guys did a great job, and I want to record that. I want everybody to hear my comment. I'm still impressed by the fact that Christian was able to remain standing the whole time, even though he was wobbling back and forth there. I would find it difficult to stand for 2 hours and 20 minutes too.
Trouble standing still.
He's got a lot of resilience, that guy does, with his Toyota sign. So thank you very much. We've got the Toyota salesman has been with us the entire time. Aside from that, this was a really good presentation. You covered a lot of interesting things. I think we covered it all very well, with the one exception of those international strategy models. Since this is, of course, an international business, we needed that. So I think maybe we'll either leave it in there the way it is, or I'll add to it a little bit before we post it on the Moodle shell. But with that, let me get us out of the recording because it's going to be a big file anyway. But again, congratulations on doing a great job. All three of you, you really knocked it off, knocked the ball out of the park. We had a great moderator take us through also.
Thank